bad design is everywhere, just like this terrible table here. It doesn't even do the one thing it really should be able to do, holding things steady. And this is driving me crazy! But I don't want to let bad design ruin my day, so let's fix it. I messed up. Hold on, I don't want to get ahead of myself. First, I should tell you what's so special about this table that I want to save it. The thing is, I really like this table, despite all the stains and dents. Maybe even more because of them. They show what the table has already been through. And that's a lot, because this table was first used by my grandparents over 60 years ago. And now I will try to give it a new life by designing and building some new legs for the tabletop. But first I have to come up with a good design. So let's start with some cool drawings. No, or maybe yes. I mean, it depends. Of course, I could just start drawing some cool and fancy designs, but the design also needs to be feasible. Because it doesn't make much sense to design a totally awesome table that I cannot build. Going crazy and playing around with the wildest ideas can result in really unique designs. But you know what else brings out great designs? Limitations. So what are my limitations? The designing process is heavily dependent on the use case of the table. It will be used for all kinds of things I do in my little studio. So you could call it a work table, but I want it to be a really nice one. That can hold things steady. But there's more I have to consider. How much budget do I have? How will it be made? How much time do I have? And what materials can I use? In this case, the answers are pretty simple. I got almost no budget, so I will make everything myself with the tools at my disposal. I think it will take 2 to 3 weeks and I will only use materials I already have. I have these pieces of a dismantled corner bench from my parents' old kitchen, and I will build the table legs out of them. These glued up boards used to be the seats of the bench, and I think they will do great as table legs because they are thick and quite solid. And there isn't much else I could use them for because they are made from spruce wood, which is a pretty soft wood. And so they wouldn't do great as, for example, a tabletop. But they should handle their new job as table legs with ease. So now I can finally start sketching. I mean, I could. But because I'm leaving the tabletop as it is, I need to make sure everything fits together. Since I don't want to change much about the tabletop, I need these measurements so I can figure out which designs are possible. Additionally, I have to consider the two major features of this table. This one is really useful. It allows to extend the tabletop. I absolutely have to make this part of the design. And I will hold myself accountable for it. If I can't make this work, I would wear this cap for the rest of my life. So, extending the table must work in the final design. Nice! One more limitation. The other feature looks useful, but it really isn't. This feature was once intended to switch between couch and dining table, but I really don't have any use for that. I could use a height adjustable desk, but even if I would raise the base, the height wouldn't be adjustable far enough with this mechanism to be used as a sit-stand desk. Now that I know what I'm working with, I can finally start designing. I start by sketching and doing some brief research. I look for inspiration, but also for things I don't like. The table should be a joy to use, so I absolutely want to avoid things like these stupid shin breaker bars. Therefore, I compare my own ideas with other people's designs. The references are helping me to notice obvious flaws early in the process. I want to understand the thing I'm designing, and I try to consider as many different perspectives as possible. I need to do that so I can give the design my own style. And yeah, we could extensively talk about personal styles when it comes to design and art, and how we are always influenced by our role models and references, and that our own style is made up of them. And so being unique is pretty much impossible, but at the same time it isn't, because every one of us is unique. And so our work is unique as long as we don't directly copy stuff. But we should discuss this another time, because I want to get this table done. The design of the legs has to fit the style of the tabletop. But I also want the whole table to get a fresh new look. I want it to be playful, so that the whole table looks inviting to sit down at it and have fun. I usually start with pencil on paper, because for me that's the easiest way to get into a flow state. I keep it rough at first, to get a feeling for all the limitations. Looking only at the boundaries I gave myself, it feels like there isn't much room to play. But while sketching, it's quite liberating. All these basic drawings can be altered and refined in endless ways. Without restrictions, I would drown in possibilities. Too many options would make it exhausting and difficult to make something good, and it could end in reinventing the wheel. I'm slowly getting the feeling that I'm starting to repeat myself. That's often the right moment to pick the best drafts and start to refine them. But that I'm doing in Photoshop. At this point, digital tools have an advantage. I would keep drawing with pencil on paper, but alone the ability to copy the parts that stay the same in these more complex drawings is such a huge time saver. I really love drawing and I do it all the time. It's very important for my design process because I want to make sure that I found a good design before I start building. I don't know if you noticed, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. To be honest, when it comes to finding a good design, I mostly don't mind it. It's good for the design to be very critical with the drafts and to keep on working on them, but it can lead to feeling stuck. And at some point, it always seems like nothing is going to work. Usually that's the perfect moment to take a step back, do something unrelated and come back later with a fresh eye. Doing this over and over again works to find a good design. It just can take forever. Hopefully you have a better approach to this. And of course, don't take this as advice. After all, I'm a perfectionistic bitch. The only thing I can say that's probably mostly true, the first draft of anything is shit, but at some point you have to move on. This time I got a bit lucky and it didn't take so long to find something that has potential. That said, I'm certain that I will keep tweaking the design regardless of how much I like it now. Because that's just how it is with designing stuff. It's a long process. But at least I can go on to the next step, building a model. For this I will use some polystyrene. This stuff is just great because it's so easy to work with. Scoring it with a knife and then simply breaking it apart leaves a nice and pretty clean edge. To really get an idea what my design could look like, I need a physical model. Yes, this may seem a bit excessive, but trust me, this will always make the final thing much better. Building a model takes a while, and I don't want to bore you with the tabletop part, because I only have to make a small replica of the original. So let's speed it up a bit. Now that the tiny tabletop is ready, I can focus again on the design of the legs. First, I want to get the shape right. The sketches gave me an idea what could work, but now I will bring my design into reality, so I can look at it from every angle. How it looks then is what really matters. For that, I cut ever so slightly different shaped legs out of paper until I find one that feels right. Yeah, that's very abstract. But come on, give me a break. This isn't a YouTube tutorial. Let me try again. The nuances are crucial. For example, I focus a lot on the flow of the shape. What feelings does it convey? Does it feel heavy or light? Soft or rigid or organic? Playful or solid or rough? It's the job of the designer to decide how it should be. Yeah, that's still a bit abstract, but that's just how design works. There isn't exactly a right or wrong. At various stages of my process, I try to get some feedback. A different point of view can really help to elevate a design. And even non-professionals can give really helpful feedback because design is so subjective. But remember, feedback should only be taken seriously if it is meant to be constructive. Finding a nice shape took some time, but now I can finally trace it to the polystyrene and cut it out. Now that the first of the tiny little legs looks right, I can use it as a reference for the remaining 3. With tools like a laser cutter, a mill or even a tiny router, I could make sure that all the legs are precisely the same. However, the tiny little accidents that happen when doing them by hand can make a difference. What I mean is that I try to make them all exactly the same, but because I'm building them one by one, they all come out a tiny bit different. But for the design process, this isn't bad. Actually, it's pretty great, because I can compare the tiny differences and see what I like and what I don't like about them. And so I can refine my design even more through random little accidents. When I finished the drawings, I thought I had to make more than one model to find something good. But I think I got lucky. This one feels right to me. And I want to see my table with these legs. Building the model gave me some time to reflect about some of my other drafts. Initially I expected that something like this would be needed to make the table playful. But now I've come to the conclusion that it would look too forced. I still kinda like it, but it's not the right direction for the table. Also because I think the materials I want to use aren't the perfect fit for this. Some of the other designs look too stiff and not playful enough, or just bad. What I was skeptical about this design, I think, was the placement of the legs. But putting them further apart is much better, and I really like how this looks now. So it's time for the real deal. Let's build the legs. But there's a problem. How do I get the design of these tiny legs to the right size? My first idea was to photograph the leg, but I instantly had flashbacks to photographing my large paintings, which is always a bit of a pain in the ass because of the optical distortion caused by the lens. But then I remembered that my girlfriend has a fairly high resolution flatbed scanner for scanning analog photos. I use Photoshop and Illustrator to enlarge the scan to the size of the real legs, and I clean it up a bit. And once again, I refine the shape of the legs, because in the enlarged version, all the tiny irregularities show a lot more. And when the printer is finally done, I simply glue the sheets together. My printer can print on DIN A3, which is good, but isn't quite large enough for the legs. I thought that this should be super easy. Unfortunately, I was wrong about that. The aligning wasn't as straightforward as I imagined. And after wasting some time on various not so clever attempts, I finally listened to your screams. And you're absolutely right. I should be ashamed of myself for not printing out an overlapping outline. That makes it much easier to align the sheets. Thanks for that, but please stop insulting me. I hate it. Nah, I'm just kidding. Now that I have the exact outlines in the right size, I can build a template so I can shape the legs with a router. For that, I'm using HDF. This bandsaw belonged to my other grandpa, so not the one I have the table from. Anyway, I'm very lucky that it still works, because it wasn't in use for at least 15 years after he passed away. I had to clean off a bit of rust, change the blade and clean out a full bucket of nuts a squirrel had hoarded in there. Oh, and don't worry, I haven't thrown away a bucket full of perfectly good nuts from the squirrel's reserve. Most of them were just shells. I think something like a mouse had the buffet of its dreams in this bandsaw. Long story short, I'm lucky that it still works. And even though it isn't as precise as a modern high-end bandsaw, it does a great job when you work around its weaknesses. For the rest of the shaping, I start with a random orbital sander. I really want to make sure that I come as precisely to my desired shape as possible. To not remove too much, I switch to good old hand sanding. Can I say something insightful about this? Let me think. Don't use the sandpaper until it's smooth? But yeah, that's it. I mean, it's sanding with sandpaper by hand. I'm not yet so happy with this part here. It doesn't feel right. I think I have to adjust it a bit. This tiny bit here has to go. Maybe you noticed, I place a great deal of importance on the shape of the legs. Did I f it up? Nah, I think it's good. I'm convinced that if the shape feels unnatural or doesn't have the right flow, it would ruin the design. Because if something has a bad or weird shape, it always catches the eye and the focus shifts to it. And everyone will notice that something is wrong, even if they can't put it into words. Humans just have a natural sense for that. I also have to make sure that it looks good with the tabletop. And there's a problem. Like this, the table would be too high. It's important that the top of the legs doesn't have contact to the underside of the tabletop. Otherwise there could be a lot of friction and it could make it really hard to extend the tabletop. So I guess I have to make the template a bit shorter, but that's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I'm not crying. You're crying. But what would a creative project be without a nervous breakdown? Right? Now that the template is done, I'm back to my parents' old corner bench and finally I can cut it into table leg sized pieces. But yeah, first I have to get rid of some leftovers from its time as a corner bench. I try to use the board as space saving as possible, but without compromising the strength of the legs. And I also try to ensure that the grain of the wood looks nice. I would love to do this like Japanese woodworkers. They pay attention to the growing direction of the tree, and so they only use lumber in its upright direction, at least as far as I understand. I don't know whether it makes a big difference from a technical point of view, but I really like it from a design perspective, and I love the high appreciation for the material. But because the board is already glued up, I focus on being efficient with my resources. I need to make a few rough cuts with the jigsaw, because the piece is too big for the bandsaw. Doesn't this sound lovely? It really wakes you up. Much better. This is loud too, but to me the violent vibrating noise of the jigsaw is way more unpleasant. I tend to sometimes underestimate how dangerous tools are, and bandsaws are a prime example for that. I always thought circular saws are the end boss for hurting oneself. And yeah, they kinda are. But I learned that bandsaws were developed for butchers to cut meat and bones, which makes them way more terrifying. I'm very glad I heard that before I did something stupid. But I did something else that was stupid. I really should have used breathing protection, because my bandsaw has no attachment for any dust collection and I breathed in way too much dust. Now I can use the template as a guide for my router. For this I use double-sided tape and a bit of faith that it will hold up. To make this work, I need a flush cut router bit with a thrust ring at the top. Please correct me if this is the wrong terminology. In German it's called a Bündigfräse mit Anlaufring oben. But what the hell do I know? This thing here. The ball bearing touches the sides of the template, which allows to copy the shape of the template. The router I'm using has, like my Banzo, no connection for dust collection. Why? Because this thing is way older than me. Yeah, you guessed it, it also belonged to my grandpa. But I'm not making the same mistake as before. I think I don't have to use so much double-sided tape. It sticks very well. When I'm done with the template, I switch to a flush cut router bit with a thrust ring at the bottom, so I can finish the shape of the legs from the other side. And I have to fix a few of my little oopsies. When I'm finally finished with routing the basic shape of the legs, I sand them to get rid of all the irregularities. It's tempting to start to refine the shape and the fine details of each of the legs now. But it's important that I don't let myself get carried away, because the table legs are still too rough to judge if they will look right in the end. So I have to trust the process. The next part I need to build are the braces that connect the legs. For this, I use a leftover piece of spruce I had lying around that almost has the right size. To get it to the right dimensions, I use an old wooden hand plane. It works, but it isn't in the best conditions anymore. The mouth is too big and the blade isn't quite as straight as it should be, but it does the job. The edges of the braces get rounded over with the router, and even though I already have a nice finish from planing, I have to sand it, so it matches the rest of the legs. Then I have to figure out where the mortises go in the legs. For that my template comes in handy again, so I can make sure every mortise is always in the same place. This makes cutting the mortises really easy, because I just need to align the template and cut with the router to the right depth. To keep things from getting unnecessarily complicated, I mostly pay attention that the template is always precisely aligned with the top of each leg. This makes sure that the table will be level and that it holds things steady. After finishing all the mortises, I can go on and cut the tenons. Yeah, I know, it would save me a lot of time to use something like a Festool domino joiner, but I don't have such a tool. I'm a designer and an artist, and yeah, I enjoy woodworking, but I don't do nearly enough of it to need such an expensive tool. Maybe someday I will get one, but until then I stick to classic wood joints. After all, they are really fun to build. I will glue the legs and braces together to get a really strong connection. Regular wood glue is super strong, and if the joint is done right, it will usually be stronger than the wood itself. But for that, a snug fit is important to ensure that the joint will hold securely. That looks good to me, so I can install the adjustable feet. They are for, you guessed it, holding things steady. My drill press isn't really equipped for such large pieces, so I have to eyeball it. That's not the best way to do this. But it's not a big deal if the holes aren't in a perfect 90-degree angle to the ground, because the feet I use are able to swivel a bit. So yeah, if you can't stand a sloppy job, close your eyes. I promise, it will be over very quickly. I clean up everything, screw in the threaded inserts so the adjustable feet hold up well, and we're done. Before I can finish the shape of the legs, I have to fix a few spots, like this hole. That's a leftover of its time as a corner bench. Every leg gets a round over with the router to make them feel even more playful. And when that's done, I sand them down to a really nice finish. The rounded edges could be seen as a practical decision, but if the sole purpose were to break the sharp edge, they wouldn't need it to be rounded over so much. So it's almost purely a design decision, because I want to focus on playfulness. But I have to be careful that it doesn't look bulky or childish. When the sanding is done, I clean off all the dust with compressed air and... I messed up. Or did the humidity? No, not really. That's my fault. I should have accounted for this. So I have to fix this now. I thought about gluing on some paper shims because there isn't really that much play at all. But I'm not so sure about that, and that's why I'm going with, I think, the better option, and I'm cutting some thin wooden strips which I'm gluing to the tenons so I can make them fit again. Look, the thing is, I built these table legs in my workshop and I also stored the wood in there. The problem with that is that my workshop is insulated very badly, which means that everything in there gets very much exposed to the temperature fluctuations and the humidity outdoors. And as far as I understand, that's not very great for furniture woodworking. Because when I put the pretty much finished table legs indoors into my studio, they started to adapt to the environment. So they started to lose moisture. That made them shrink just a tiny bit, but enough so that the joints, which I made pretty tight, got loose. For the table legs themselves, that's not really a big problem, but for the glue up, it is. So now I have to repeat what I did before, chiseling away material until I get a nice fit. Making such mistakes is annoying. But lately I've been trying to view them as part of my process. At first it feels like a lot of wasted time, and it can be quite depressing, but while correcting what went wrong, usually that feeling goes away, because it's not a failure to make a mistake. The good thing is that nobody will ever see that this went wrong. Okay, except everyone who's watching this video. I have to make sure that the tenons fit snugly in every direction to get a really strong connection. Because, well, you know, holding things steady. Yeah, that's much better. When the joints are done, it's time to take apart the table. Like I mentioned, I only need the tabletop, but I will hold on to the base. I can surely use some of its parts for something else. Before I can glue the legs together, I need to check if they fit the tabletop as I've planned. I have a tiny problem. Sorta. The thing is, it does fit here super nice, but on this side I have the issue that the table leg doesn't fit in here. It feels a bit weird to cut into the tabletop. I really don't want to screw it up. But my design relies on the tabletop hiding the top of the legs, so I have no choice. It's hard to see. The side I'm trimming down is wider than the other side. But yeah, I guess making these parts more precise just wasn't necessary for the old design. While measuring, I noticed that this probably needed to be done. However, building the model gave me confidence that modifying this isn't a big deal. And now that everything fits, I can finally glue up the legs. And done. Now I just have to let the glue dry. Yeah, that looked bad. Because I want the table to hold things steady, I'm building a really sturdy center brace to connect the legs underneath the tabletop. And yeah, this is quite a bit oversized, but that's still just materials I had lying around. I know, it seems weird to have a 6-meter square steel tube just lying around. As you probably can tell, I'm not a good welder, and please don't expect to see any nice and satisfying weld seams. Rather, you should prepare yourself to roast me in the comments. I would love to be dragged through the mud for how bad of a welder I am, but I also would appreciate some tips. To be honest, I have thought about getting into MIG welding, because I think it would get me better, faster and more consistent results than stick welding. Or maybe I would produce just as bad welds, only through a different process. Let me know, but for now I stick to what I have. I made it too long. Somehow I didn't count it in that I have to weld this piece to both sides. And now it's 1 centimeter too long. Yeah, I know, my welding skills are horrible. But I have a solution for this. It's called an angle grinder. So yes, I will grind it off and weld over it again until all holes are filled, and then grind it off again. But I think this brace will do its job to hold things steady. The wood glue has dried by now and all the pieces are ready. To assemble the table, I'm using screw-in nuts again. I like them because they give me a secure connection that can also be taken apart easily and repeatably. These threaded inserts are quite easy to install. Although, if I had to adopt this design to batch production, I would definitely try to find a better connection method. But then I would probably also change the construction of the tabletop and make everything fit more seamlessly. Yeah, it's always possible to make it look better or think every aspect through to the last detail. Even though that's often the goal for designers, it's not always perfect to shoot for perfection. I don't want to design the soul out of things just for the sake of it. In this case, I want to keep the story of this table going, because it would be a shame to throw it away only because it isn't perfect. Now that all the screw-in nuts are installed and the table is structurally pretty much finished, it's time for the last step, making everything come together design-wise. Most importantly, the color. It definitely can't stay like this, looking like badly patched pants. One last time, I'm using technology for this, so I can try different looks, because this isn't as easy as it might seem. Picking the right color for anything is hard, and making it work in combination with different materials is even harder. At first I thought the legs might look good in a contrasting color, something that pops. You know, to make it look playful. But after seeing it like this, I don't think it would work. Maybe if the legs would have a cleaner and more contrasting shape against the tabletop. But with the flowy playfulness I'm going for with my design, I've realized it just has to look like one piece. So I have to match the legs to the tabletop. I fill a few holes and knots and then it's time for the paint. The paint I'm using, well, I can't say much about it. Honestly, this is a bit of an experiment, because I don't have much experience with wood paints, lacquers or stains. I would rather use a type of wood that gives me the color I want naturally. But because the veneer on the tabletop is painted already, I don't have much of a choice. I tested the paint on a scrap piece. It looked like I wanted it to look, and that's pretty much all I can say about it. I could explain how to prepare the legs for painting on them with oil paints, but that's probably not important right now. After 2 coats of paint, the legs are finally done. So onto the tabletop. I want it to look nice again. This is the last big piece, and I even thought about keeping it as it is. But I think it will make the whole table come together when it is cleaned up and nice again. And this shouldn't be a big deal. I scrape off all the residues that the table collected over the decades, give it a light sanding, glue together what came loose and fill a few holes. I have to be careful that I'm not damaging the veneer, but because the veneer is in pretty good shape, without any loose or very thin spots, it all worked out great. So now I can paint it. It looks like shit. I messed up again. Yeah, now I have to sand it down again. And try again. I sanded off all of the paint. I know, I didn't want it to do this, but I had to because it looked so awful. Yeah, but sometimes you lose and sometimes the others win. And I hope I don't have to sand it off again. Yeah, I have to sand it off again. But now I'm doing what I should have done in the first place. Why haven't I done this earlier? Please ask me something easier. I just thought I can do this with a brush. I mean, with oil paints, I would easily achieve a super nice and uniform finish. But yeah, I know, these aren't oil paints. 3 coats later, I've finally done it. A nice and even finish. I even managed to get a bit of a gradient from the edge toward the center. The only thing left is to protect it. For that, I'm using hot wax oil. A few coats of that and the table is done. Pretty much, at least. One last hole to drill. Does it count as one? It's one hole going through the tube, but technically I have to drill 2 holes. Anyway, this will determine if I have to wear the cap. Yeah, now it's getting serious. The moment of truth. Woo! Yeah, I don't have to wear the cap. I left the extension piece as it was, in part because I wanted to keep one piece original, but mostly because the grain direction doesn't match the rest of the tabletop. That's a bit weird, and I don't know why someone would build it like that, but it is what it is. For now I will keep it like this, because I haven't yet had a good idea to make it better. I thought about giving it a contrasting color, but I'm not so sure about that. Anyway, I'm happy with how the table turned out. And the best part, it now holds things really steady. Yeah, of course, a concrete block would be even more stable, but because I think a table should be movable without a forklift, that's not really an option. I really like the design, and because editing this video took me an eternity, I had a lot of time to look at the finished table and to think about what I would change. To be honest, not much. I would spray paint the legs now too, but I don't hate the visible brush strokes enough to put in the work to change it. Other than that, I'm really happy with the table, and that's a rarity. Because, like most artists and designers can probably relate, there's usually always something I desperately want to change. I think my grandparents would also be happy to see their old and shabby table redesigned in a fresh new look. What do you think? I would love to hear some feedback. And if you liked this video, stick around for the next one. I will try my best that it will not take so long. Thanks for watching, love you all, bye!